The decadent ideal of placing beauty above all other things, even goodness, results not only in the worship of art, but in the worship of evil art. And such an idea gives rise, in turn, to ideas about cursed art, haunted art, and art with malevolent powers. Thus we have the poisonous yellow book that corrupted Oscar Wilde's character of Dorian Gray, and thus we have that character's famous portraiture, which ages and corrupts in the subject's stead. Today's adventure will take us to this intersection between decadent art and haunted portraiture. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to explore the Ravenloft Domain of Dread known as Ghastria, a domain about decadence and haunted art. As with all my Ravenloft videos, we'll go over what the domain is, list some media to help us get an imaginative grip on the domain, and then sketch out an adventure. In this case, our adventure will be 4 acts, taking PCs from level 3 up through level 6. That is, they will finish the adventure at level 6, and at the end, with DM's permission, level up to 7. This adventure takes elements from Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus, Critical Role, Call from the Netherdeep, and keys from the Golden Vault. Before jumping into that, however, what is the domain of Ghastria? Well, a notorious hedonist, Marquis Stezen de Palarno was popular among his noble peers, but craved immortality. A mysterious artist offered him eternity by painting de Palarno's portrait upon a magical canvas. But the artist didn't mention that the painting would strip de Palarno of his love of life and natural charm. The Marquis has discovered a reprieve from his now dulled existence, however. Once every season, when he shows the painting to an audience, it consumes their souls and refreshes his thrill for life. De Palarno's artistic predations captured the attention of the dark powers, which drew his lands into the mists. Now, Ghastria is a fertile island that, like its lord, lacks an essential vim except for once a season, when vigor fleetingly returns. So Ghastria is a Ravenloft domain ruled by an eternal, immortal hedonist, the Marquis Stezen de Palarno. This is a guy who loves to indulge in every pleasure and every vice, and so the dark powers have cursed him with the inability to feel or enjoy such things. To circumvent the curse, or rather to struggle with it, the Marquis has a haunted portrait that represents himself. The portrait ages and corrupts instead of him, and he periodically shows the portrait to innocent victims. Their souls are stolen by it, and he, for a little while, gets to experience all his favorite decadent pleasures again. In the adventure that we're going to sketch out, we're going to take this same basic idea of the Darklord, but we're going to add a little twist. Yes, the Darklord's life is indeed trapped in a portrait of him, but to suck the life out of victims, he doesn't need to show them that portrait, he just needs to include his victims in other paintings. I'll explain more soon, but first, in order to get an imaginative grip on this domain and the Darklord, let's talk about some influential media. And to begin that discussion, I want to recall that famous summer in Geneva in 1816, when Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley, and John Polidori gathered together at night and had a competition to see who could write the scariest story. Famously, the results of that competition include not only some of the first vampire fiction, but also the novel Frankenstein. You've probably already heard of that famous night in Geneva, but what you might not have known about is what those 4 English authors were reading and what inspired them to start writing scary stories themselves. They were reading a volume called Tales from the Dead, a compilation of short stories, and their favorite story in that volume, the one that inspired them to write scary stories of their own, is the first item we're going to mention when it comes to influential media for Ghastria. That item is the 1813 tale, The Family Portraits, by J.A. Appel. This is a fun gothic tale featuring a framing narrative about a man who comes to an ancient castle with an eerie family. The family all have tales about various portraits, and they range from the eerily coincident to the supernatural. It's a fun work and essential reading for anyone who wants to read about haunted paintings. The next item on our list is Oscar Wilde's 1890 work, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now you might think that this was the main influence for the Darklord of Ghastria, Stezen de Palarno, but you would be wrong. In fact, James Lowder, the writer who designed that Darklord, said that he was mainly focused on just a decadent, hedonistic marquis, some kind of aristocrat who really loved to indulge in pleasure, and then who was cursed with the inability to experience it. That, plus the idea of the love of art, ultimately produced this Darklord. Still, the idea of the haunted painting that ages in the place of its subject is present in the Picture of Dorian Gray and is famously embodied in that work. so it must be included among the list of influential media here. As for a true depiction of the Darklord of Ghastria, though, as for a really accurate portrayal of who the Marquis Stezen de Palerno is, I must recommend the character of Duke Jean de Cesantis from J.K. Huysmans' A Rebours, or Against Nature, or Against the Grain. This 1884 work is fascinating. It's a novel without a plot and only features one character. The main subject of the book is just how this character decorates his house and what he indulges in. And everything he indulges in is evil and artificial and blasphemous and irreverent. It's practically a Bible for the decadent movement, and it in fact influenced Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. In Chapter 10 of The Picture of Dorian Gray, we learn that the character of Dorian Gray was corrupted, poisoned by a book. And the book that gets described is the book that is exactly Huysmans' A Rebours. We learn that Dorian Gray was poisoned by a yellow book. It was a book without a plot. It featured only one character, and the main content was that character trying to stimulate in himself all of the sensations and ideas of ages past. Against Nature, or Against the Grain by Huysmans is about the supreme decadent, the evil lover of art who loves evil art for art's sake because there's nothing more great than art, especially in the height of its evil. This character is made to be a Darklord. And this same book, or perhaps Wilde's description of it, also influenced Robert W. Chambers' anthology, The King in Yellow, another set of stories about a corrupting yellow book with baleful influences. Now, on the topic of evil or haunted portraiture, it's worth reading Edgar Allan Poe's The Oval Portrait from 1894. It's a simple, shorter tale, but it is a really elegant case of a story where an artist paints all too well. He's too good at capturing the beauty in the life of his subject, so good that he literally captures it, killing the subject. And there's also a 1904 story by M.R. James called The Mezzotint. This is a fun, spooky little story about a haunted engraving. An engraving that seems to move and change when people aren't looking, and which, across its movements and changes, relates a horrible, tragic tale. So those are a few influential media when it comes to thinking about Ghastria and its Darklord. But they're all written media, and because this domain has so much to do with visual art and paintings, I wanted to recommend a few pieces of visual art, decadent art, the kind of art that Stezen de Palerno would really enjoy, and which you could work into the adventure that we're going to sketch out. The first is Caspar David Friedrich's 1820 piece, Two Men Contemplating the Moon. It's a neat little gothic piece where you have a couple of men staring at an eerie moon that's rising in a crescent. I'm told that this painting had some influence on the aesthetics of the video game Bloodborne, and I'd believe that. This isn't nearly as creepy as Francisco de Goya's work, however, specifically his black paintings and his proverbs. There are a couple of entries in Proverbs that are particularly unnerving, especially the rearing horse biting the rider, and the robed giant looming over the frightened campers. There's also Rudolf Bresdin's 1854 lithograph, The Comedy of Death. This depicts a monstrous tree with dancing skeletons at the edges of its branches, and languishing, wailing, dying people at the roots. Certainly a pinnacle of the decadent movement, it's one of several works of art that de Cesantis lists as decorating his home in Against the Grain. Much more decadent than that, however, is Gustave Moreau's 1876 painting, The Apparition. This is the symbol of the decadent movement visually. You can't get a painting that's more decadent than this. I mean, look at it. You've got Salome dancing naked before Herod, the murderer of Christ, in order to win as a prize the head of John the Baptist, the only man that Jesus loved. And that prize appears not on a platter or passively, but actively, its face frozen in horror as blood drips from its neck, floating in air supernaturally. And in the midst of this, Salome turns her nudity towards the viewers of the canvas. This painting is evil with a capital E. The decadents obsessed over it, they loved it, and Moreau drew several different versions of it across his career. I'm not sure if I would hang it up in my own house, but I feel like some of my viewers might have just seen their new favorite painting. Moving on, since we're talking about decadent art, it's worth mentioning the work of Odilon Redon. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I really like his 1882 piece, The Eye Like a Bizarre Balloon Headed Towards Infinity. And yes, in Against Nature, de Cesantis loves the work of Redon and Moreau as well. There's also Redon's 1885 piece, Homage to Goya, that has another severed head, and the other 1885 piece, The Marsh Flower, A Sad Human Head. Those decadents, they really like their severed heads, don't they? And of course, you can't talk about decadent visual art without mentioning at least Audrey Beardsley. I would check out his illustrations from Oscar Wilde's play Salome, as well as the 1894 piece, The Climax. And finally, when it comes to original Ravenloft source material about Ghastria and Stezen de Palerno, there's an entry in the 1991 2nd edition Ravenloft supplement Darklords written by James Lowder. Lowder is the fellow who designed this Darklord, and he also co-wrote a tournament adventure or league adventure with Bruce Nesmith. This adventure, from way back in 2nd edition, was called The Dance of Death. Bruce Nesmith wrote the first half, James Lowder wrote the second half. In the first half, the PCs were invited to a party where Stezen revealed his portrait and killed the PCs. In the second half, the PCs awoke as revenants, and then climbed back and made their way back to the mansion to seek their revenge. It was apparently a really fun adventure, but unfortunately it may be lost to time. From what I've heard, the notes to the first half of the adventure have been lost, and the notes to the second half of the adventure are in a legal gray area where it's not clear whether Wizards would permit people to share them. Still, we do have a cool outline. And speaking of outlines, let's sketch out our adventure. In Act 1, the PCs struggle to survive as they find themselves suddenly and inexplicably inside a haunted painting. In Act 2, they meet the sinister Marquis de Palerno and learn a little bit more about their fate. In Act 3, the PCs endure another night of struggle trapped inside a different enchanted painting. And in Act 4, the PCs meet someone who helps them steal and destroy the Marquis' enchanted portrait, without which he cannot live. Alright, so let's lay out this adventure. In Act 1, at level 3, the PCs suddenly find themselves traversing some gloomy autumnal woods at night. The stars are all out, but the moon is still a rising golden crescent. Everything is absolutely still and motionless, and everything is absolutely silent, too, except for the PCs. Should the PCs touch any trees or rocks or the ground or anything, they will soon find their hands or whatever they touch that surface with are covered in paint. Paint the same color as the surface of whatever they touched. It's like everything is wet with paint. Inspection reveals it's oil paint, somehow. The PCs soon come across a pair of stooping men in cloaks and three-cornered hats. They're facing away from the PCs, and one of them is gesturing towards the moon as another one looks on. These two men, they're also both still as statues and silent as the grave. They pay the PCs no mind if the PCs address them, and they do not respond if the PCs even poke or prod them. Although, should the PCs do that, they will find that their implements, their weapons, or their hands are covered in paint. Should the PCs move around to face the two men, they discover horrifyingly that the men don't have faces, just smooth, blank, featureless surfaces where their faces should be. And finally, if the PCs poke or prod too much, or should they attack, the two men immediately melt into blobs of paint and then meld together into a paint monster. It has the statistics of a black pudding, but whenever it strikes a PC, it also leaves a streak or a trail of navy blue paint where it hit them. This monster attacks immediately and it fights until it is destroyed, at which point it spreads out, a mere paint slick. Likewise, if the PCs poke or prod or attack any of the trees, or perhaps try to climb one of the trees, they too become monsters. Awakened trees, which have the same statistics as awakened trees, but should they strike any of the PCs, they will leave streaks and stains of paint on them. As the PCs battle such things, it should become increasingly clear that everything here is not just covered in paint, but made of paint somehow. This should suggest to the PCs that they are actually inside a painting. As soon as a PC voices this hypothesis, or as soon as they make a check that entails it, the PC should be able to see, in the distance, a golden glowing rectangle of some kind, a rectangle of light. Along the way, they could encounter other paint monsters that have the statistics of various oozes. But as the PCs approach the rectangle, they soon find that it's a window into another chamber. The chamber looks like it's a room made for giants. Everything is enormous. And they can see various works of grotesque art hanging on the walls of that chamber, including art of severed heads and floating eyeballs. Weird things. Now, the PCs cannot break this window, nor can they breach it. As soon as anyone casts a spell on it, or attacks it, however, there is a sound of thunder and a bright magical flash, and everything goes black. The PCs reach level 4, and we proceed to Act 2. In Act 2, at level 4, the PCs wake up. Apparently, they're staying in an inn. A sweet odor fills the air, the odor of baked goods. Should the PCs leave their room, they discover that they're staying in an inn that doubles as a dessert bakery. The whole place is called Against the Grain. Disturbingly, the PCs wake up with one level of exhaustion. The memory of traversing a painting and fighting monsters inside of it, too, is very fresh in their minds. Mention these things side by side. Say something like, you each have a level of exhaustion, and the memory of fighting paint monsters is still fresh as you awaken. Players will want to know why they have a level of exhaustion, and if you just keep mentioning that weird dream they had and mention how fresh that memory of fighting paint monsters is, they'll probably at least hypothesize that there's a connection between that weird paint monster dream and why they feel so exhausted. Now, the owner and innkeeper of Against the Grain is a woman named Charlotte, and she happily greets the PCs. She asks them if they can remember anything, and if they indicate any kind of forgetfulness or confusion, she sighs and laments that that's how things go with travelers to Ghastria. Those who arrive seldom remember how they did it. But she reassures them that they arrived safe and sound the other day, and in fact the whole village came out to see them. They seemed to be exhausted after they came out of the mists, however, so she was happy to sell them some rooms and put them up. Charlotte mentions that when the party arrived, they even got the attention of the Marquis himself, the Marquis Stezen de Parlarno, who rules over the whole land. He gave them that special look he gives to people that he likes, she says. So they are truly lucky individuals. If the PCs describe their strange dream, Charlotte doesn't know anything about it. Not unless they mention paintings specifically. If the PCs mention paintings, Charlotte exclaims that painting and portraiture is all the rage throughout Ghastria, and that there's no greater love of paintings than the Marquis himself. He's said to have a great gallery of very strange and unusual paintings, some of them allegedly morbid. Perhaps the PCs should seek an audience. He did seem to fancy them after all. And she gives the PCs directions to where they can find the Marquis on the other side of town. Now, I mentioned that Against the Grain sells pastries, and indeed they do. Let them function as rations in this domain. Despite being pastries, they are sort of bland and flavorless. Anyway, as for the domain, there are stage theaters, cafes, art galleries, studios. Use maps from Waterdeep Dragon Heist like the theater map. There are also more scholarly and academic maps in Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos. Now, from where the PCs exit Against the Grain, the Marquis' mansion should be visible across town, high on a hill. And this means walking for a few miles. They'll doubtlessly have some random encounters, and I would use the lower city encounters from page 186 of Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, especially leaning into those hostile ones. Remove any references to Baldur's Gate or Forgotten Realms in general, and maybe make everything seem a little more French? And again, feature a few of them on the PC's way to the mansion. Once the PCs arrive at the mansion, they are let in by a humanoid construct. This construct wears a hooded yellow robe, and its face resembles a porcelain mask, although it wears no mask. This construct has the statistics of a Galvan mage from Rime of the Frost Maiden, or some other construct of your preference, and it escorts the PCs inside. Now, for a map of this building, use the map from Masterpiece Imbroglio, the adventure from Keys from the Golden Vault. The PCs are let in through the front, and they're escorted to area G9, where the Marquis Stezen de Parlarno sits at the head of a table, enjoying quail in curry sauce. He wears a bejeweled golden robe, and he immediately stands up and claps and proclaims welcome to the PCs. He invites them to sit down and seems perfectly friendly. He thanks the PCs for everything that they've done, and if they ask what he means, he says why, thanks to them, he can enjoy this very feast. He'll explain more, but not until the feast is over. The Marquis will not comply if the PCs try to rush him or make demands of him. Instead, he'll just insist that they sit down and relax, and he'll get to the details soon. Notably, the Marquis does not respond if the PCs attack him or cast spells on him. He takes no damage. He suffers no ill conditions. Spells just seem to fizzle out. He promises to explain this too, if only the PCs will just sit down and enjoy the feast with him. Really, the only thing that the PCs could do to rush the Marquis is if they start destroying his fine stuff. If they start cutting up his curtains or ruining his table or his chairs or something, then he's going to untuck his napkin, stand up, and be a bit more forthright. Whether the PCs sit down or successfully rush him by breaking his stuff, the Marquis leads the PCs from Area G9 into Area G13, where a number of scary portraits hang. The PCs should recognize these paintings. They're the ones that they viewed through the yellow rectangular window in their dream. And indeed, among the paintings hanging on the wall is a painting of the PCs themselves, plowing through a dark, autumnal painted morass. In fact, make it be a scene that was particularly memorable to the players when they were fighting the paint monsters from Act 1. The other paintings include Moreau's The Apparition, and Redon's The Eye Like a Bizarre Balloon Headed Towards Infinity, and so on. And at this point, Stezen de Polarno explains his curse. Despite his immaculate taste and his cultivated refinement, de Polarno cannot smell, taste, or touch anything. He cannot enjoy the pleasures that he's an expert on. His existence is numb. The only escape from his wretched condition, he explains, is when he adds someone to his paintings, like so, and he points to the painting that features the PCs. When he adds someone to his paintings, they wither and die in real life, but as they wither and die in real life, he, Marquis Stezen de Polarno, can taste again, smell again, feel again, and actually enjoy his pleasures that he has a right to. So he thanks the PCs, because he reassures them he's really enjoying himself. The PCs will probably try to attack the Marquis, it makes sense, but the Marquis is functionally invincible. He cackles and laughs and says that he cannot be hurt. As for the paintings on the wall, each one is trapped behind a casting of Force Cage. This is an ability that the Marquis has as a Darklord. So long as he is awake, at will, he can cast Force Cage to protect any of the paintings on his walls. He doesn't need to concentrate on it, it's Force Cage, and it lasts as long as he wishes, not just an hour. Now this should all be very frustrating to the PCs, and maybe to the players too, so it's at this point that the Marquis will start summoning Galvan Magin, all dressed in yellow hooded robes with faces like porcelain masks, all trying to force the PCs out, either by shoving them or attacking them, knocking them unconscious and dragging them, just getting them out of the mansion. There's nothing else that they can do here anyway, other than destroying the Marquis' stuff, which he can easily replace. They can't really harm the Marquis or the things he really cares about, his paintings. So out they go, one way or another, and they can spend the rest of the day however they wish. At some point they will need to rest, though, and when they do, they level up to 5, and we proceed to Act 3. In Act 3, at level 5, the PCs seem to awaken from a long rest, one that gets rid of their level of exhaustion, but the surroundings soon make it clear that this is another painting that they're in. In this case, it's Redon's The Eye Like a Bizarre Balloon Headed Towards Infinity, and the PCs are suspended in the skull-shaped basket that dangles from the titular eye. This eyeball has the statistics of a light devourer from Critical Role Call of the Netherdeep, and the basket suspended from it, tied to it, is a mere 5 feet away within its melee reach. Take away the creature's water-breathing feature, and give it a fly speed with the ability to hover instead of its swim speed. The balloon and the suspended PCs are all 200 feet up in the air above a shadowy, abyssal forest. And as the PCs struggle and fight with this monster, it sheds and bleeds black ink like blood. When it's finally reduced to 0 hit points, it does not pop or burst or plummet. Instead, its carcass merely floats there, and it becomes a functional hot air balloon that the PCs can steer and fly around with. And as they fly around, they can encounter other monsters in this painting, based on Odilon Redon's other works. That weird head attached to a marsh flower would make a cool monster. You could give it the statistics of a slithering bloodfin, for instance, or some other creature. Eventually, however, the PCs should catch sight of another illuminated yellow rectangle, another opening to peer out into the art gallery of the Marquis. And once they're close enough to either attack it or cast a spell on it, again, there's a sound of thunder, a flash of arcane light, and everything goes black. As the dream comes to an end, the PCs return to consciousness, and we proceed to Act 4 at level 6. In Act 4 at level 6, when the PCs awaken from their long rest, whether that long rest was constituted by sleep or just zoning out, they have 2 levels of exhaustion. This is serious. It would appear as if their life forces are really ebbing away and being drained more and more every time they visit a painting while they sleep. It is at this time, however, the PCs receive a note, a mysterious letter from someone known as H.C. The note's author claims he can help the PCs, and asks them to come and meet him at a tavern called the Pallid Mask. Should the PCs go there, use the map for Elfsong Tavern at the beginning of Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, and use the first encounter there, just swapping out HC for the person of interest, he's a young man with blonde hair dressed in black, and supplement the bandits and bandit captains with some more muscle, like maybe some pirate captains. Remember, your PCs have 2 levels of exhaustion, but they can still fight. Should the PCs successfully defend HC from a rush of mercenaries that come to attack him, he takes them to a corner and reveals his identity. He is Hildred Castaigne, a local who is usually dismissed as a madman, but who actually has a plan to defeat and overthrow the Marquis. He proposes a plan for the PCs. The plan is to wait until nightfall, and then sneak into the Marquis's mansion. Once inside, they will seek out the enchanted portrait of the Marquis, a portrait that contains his life force and prevents him from being harmed. That portrait must be destroyed. Normally, it would lie behind an impenetrable force cage, but at night, when the Marquis sleeps, the spell goes down, and it is vulnerable. Hildred draws a rough map of the Marquis's mansion, and gives each PC a magical elixir that cures their 2 levels of exhaustion as an incentive. And here we're just going to run the adventure Masterpiece Imbroglio from Keys from the Golden Vault. We're just going to change a few things. First, and most obviously, the PCs get this quest from Hildred Castaigne, and he's the one who draws the map and everything. Like the original quest giver Grinky, Hildred's notes are incorrect. He thinks the portrait gets stored in the basement, but in fact it's up at the top of the tower, in area G27. Also, change Guildmaster Dusk to the Marquis Stezen de Palarno. That's where he sleeps. You can keep Darnatal Livereth there, why not? And keep the portrait and its statistics up in G27 all the same. The final change we're going to make is to add a certain combat encounter in area G13 where the portraits were. At night, the force cage spells that protect the paintings are down, but each painting is now a monster. It has the statistics of a scarecrow, except they have a fly speed and can hover. They just sit there, however, on the wall, using their terrifying glare ability in order to impose paralysis on the PCs. They can do this over and over without being detected, thanks to their false appearance trait, too. So the PCs are going to walk in there, they're going to be making saving throw after saving throw after saving throw until a couple of them get paralyzed, at which point the paintings will unhook themselves from the wall and attack like scarecrows, hovering in the air and doing the slam attack. Fortunately, the Marquis is a heavy sleeper, so the PCs would have to do something like cast Thunderwave in order to really wake him up. Speaking of the Marquis, he is invincible as long as his portrait is intact, and as soon as the PCs start harming the portrait, he will wake up and spring to its defense. The portrait is quite destructible, however, and does not have that many hit points. And when the portrait is destroyed, the Marquis doubles over. He screams and moans and withers and shrivels. Steam and smoke intermingled with blood and pus escape from every one of his orifices, and there's an earthquake that rocks the foundations of the mansion. The PCs may try to escape, try to flee into the mists, but what's that they see on the wall? Those portraits, those paintings. Every single one seems to feature the PCs now? Will they be able to make it out, or are they the new cursed Darklords of Ghastria? So there's our adventure in the domain of Ghastria. What do you think? Do you like the idea of trapping PCs in paintings? If so, are there other paintings you would have used, some favorites of yours? Would you trap the PCs in Gustave Adore's lithographs, for instance? And how do you like the portrayal of Stezen de Palarno? Let me know in the comments. Thanks very much for watching. As always, do all the internet things, click like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications about new videos on this channel. Thanks!